Thank you very much. I will be speaking English for inviting me to the sixth philological days in Cetynia. I've been observing the situation in Belarus now like for 10 years and I've noticed that even among specialists in the Slavic languages there is no big awareness of this situation, which is basically the politics of the Ruski Mir, the Russian word carried out and implemented already in the beginning, in the middle 1990s. So I would say, given the situation Montenegro and the Montenegrin language are at this moment, you may find some parallels, but I will leave it to you to draw conclusions. I will start first with a brief outline of the history of the Belarusian language to place it in a context, in the socio-historical context, if you want. Then I will focus on the history of this language in independent Belarus and in the latest wave of discrimination after the falsified 2020 presidential elections. So the Belarusian language is a North Slavic language. It historically speaking, when it comes to its written form, it harks back to the Ruthenian language, which was the vernacular of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, used in writing instead of Church Slavonic. So this language was started to be used in the 12th and 13th century in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, or what today is Lithuania, Belarus, and western and central Ukraine. So in the late 16th century, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania got united in a real union with the Kingdom of Poland, and the southern half of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania was passed to the Kingdom of Poland, which explains the fact that also Ukrainians claim their language to be a descendant of Ruthenian. Basically, this southern Ruthenian, if I may say so, became what today is the Ukrainian language. In a way, the story is kind of the reinterpretation by the national movements of the Ukrainians and the Belarusians in the second half of the 19th century of the story of this Ruthenian language. Belarusian as such, as we know it today, started really to be used in the second half of the 19th century, and it was written, because the political script is here also important, in Latin letters for Uniate or Greek Catholics, if you want, and in Cyrillic for Orthodox Christians. At that time, I won't be going into historical details, we don't have time, these territories were already under the Russian administration, and the Russian administration was forbidding in the second half of the 19th century the use of local languages in the European part of the Russian Empire, especially after the 1880s, from what today is Finland down to what today is Moldova and Georgia. Belarusian, for a variety of reasons, was banned from any written use in 1863 or 1864. Then 1905 revolution happens in the wake of the Japanese, the war with Japan, and it is allowed to use Belarusian for written and publishing purposes, mind you, not for education. And the first newspaper published in both Latin script and Cyrillic started Nasza Niwa, our field, which under one guise or another is published until today. The Belarusian, ethnically Belarusian lands got split after the First World War between Poland and the Soviet Union, and in Soviet Belarus, or what today is the eastern half of Belarus, they instituted 4 official languages. It was pretty unusual. Belarusian, Yiddish, Polish, and Russian. So they were using 3 scripts. But it was the first time ever Belarusian was used in official purposes for a prolonged period of time. And in interwar Soviet Belarus, there was this push for publishing in Belarusian, making it the main language of Belarus in the period of Koreanization, the so-called nativization. And it was for real, like 80% of books at that time were published in Belarusian. This period came to an end 1938, when Russian was made the only official, the sole main statewide official language, which everyone had to learn. And the other ones, they were not so important anymore. After the Second World War, what today is Western Belarus was grabbed with other territories from interwar Poland. And once again, for a while, there was a bit of a revival of Belarusian in the second half of the 1940s, because people from Poland, they just didn't understand Russian, so they had to be educated to know Russian. Then, in the interwar Soviet Union, interwar Belarus, the Belarusian language was progressively pushed out from all the social, public context, so that it should become a marginalized language. In the 80s, only around 10% of books in Belarus were published in the Belarusian language. Now, Belarusian is considered traditionally as one of the Slavic state, Slavic languages, and Belarus was, Soviet Belarus, however, now contradictorily it may sound, was one of the signatories of the Charter of the United Nations. So it's fully recognized, it is out there, yeah? It has full status, whatever. Yet, never, until today, never in history, not a single university with Belarusian as the language of instruction was established. So it was never given this last push to become a fully, not only recognized officially, but used in practice Slavic language. Independence happens. 91, the Soviet Union split up, and Belarusian was recognized for the first time in history as the sole official language of Belarus as a nation state, like in the neighboring states of Poland. Polish is recognized in such a manner, in Lithuania, Lithuanian is recognized in such a manner, or in Ukraine, Ukrainian is recognized in such a manner. In the last years of the Soviet Union, around 10 of Belarusian children were educated in Belarusian language schools. In the second half, 5 minutes, in the second half of the 90s, 60% of Belarusian children were already educated in Belarusian medium schools. Then Lukashenko institutes its dictatorship in 95 and 96. Russian is given as a post-imperial language an equal status, and this equal status means that out of sudden Belarusian ceased to be used. So equal status given to an imperial language actually liquidates the use of the national language, because now everything is back to square one. Basically, 10% of children in Belarus enter Belarusian medium schools, and these Belarusian medium schools are often Belarusian in name, because 30, 40, 50% of subjects in reality are actually taught through the medium of Russian. Nowadays, like in the late Soviet period, only a couple, like 8–9% of books are published in Belarusian. There is not a single Belarusian language TV program. There is one, but it is broadcasting from Poland, which is not ideal. Yeah? And nowadays, after the 2020 falsified election, actually talking in Belarusian is seen by the current Belarusian authorities as a sign of extremism. People for talking Belarusian with the authorities may go to jail, may be ostracized, may lose jobs, may be killed, like actually performer, artist, and actually Afghanistan war veteran Pushkin, but Alec Pushkin was killed in June. Why? Because he always, on principle, was speaking Belarusian whenever in Belarus, and for this he got killed. There are two Belarusian Nobel Prize winners. Just tell me when I should stop. And one of them had to escape, Svetlana Alexievich, from Belarus because she was to be imprisoned. And another one, Ales Bialicki, he is in prison. The best Belarusian language writers who wanna write in the European democratic open-ended fashion, like Alhier Bacharevich and others, they had to leave the country for their safety. Nowadays, their books are included on the list of extremist materials, although they were published before the elections, and even poems by 19th century Belarusian language writers are included on the list of extremist materials. Obviously, using the white, red and white tricolor of traditional Belarusian national movement and the symbols of the first half of the 90s is also punished with imprisonment. Even the finishing. So just last week, when the National Janka Kupala Belarusian Theater, the only one in Belarus, started a new season, they have just one Belarusian language play. So that's how about the equality of the national language with an imperial language works. Thank you.